All right, so I've got a suspension trainer here. So if you decide that you do want to try suspension trainer variations of some of the movements we're doing, specifically the rows and some of the pull-up variations, then it's good to think about how to set up your suspension trainer. They're really easy to set up, but you just want to be thoughtful on a few points. So almost all suspension trainers are going to have some kind of option for wedging them into a door. So for this particular one, you can take off one of the other attachment points, and then you have just this little bit that you slip in. Your model probably won't have the exact same mechanism, but it's going to have something similar, some obvious way that you lock it in. Now, if you're going to put it into a door, you want to make sure you have a nice sturdy door. The other thing you want to consider is you want to make sure you're standing on the side of the door where you pull it to shut. You don't want to be in a door where you pull it to open, because the extra weight of your body could get the door to open. You want to make sure it's really stable. So for this one, you can see I push it and it's open, and then I pull it and it's closed. I don't have to worry about it opening on me. Sometimes, depending on who you live with, you also might want to put a little sign on the other side. Sometimes suspension trainers will come with a little red tab that says workout in progress or something like that. That slips on the other side of the door so people can see that they shouldn't be opening the door because someone else is suspended on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and get the suspension trainer open up. I'm going to slip it through with plenty of slack so I can get it through. And then I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then I give it a good pull to make sure it's in place before I put my weight on it. I just want to make sure I've got that. So now I've got a nice solid suspension trainer, and then I'm going to have another option for adjusting it higher or lower here. So almost all suspension trainers are going to have some additional cam buckles either here or sometimes in the separate handles, so you can adjust the lengths on them. Now from here, depending on your movement, you can make it more challenging or easier depending on your relationship to the anchor point. And what I mean is, if my feet are really far away from the anchor point, I'm pretty much completely vertical and I don't really have much to pull. However, if I just take even just one step forward, okay, all of a sudden I've got tension here and I've got tension at the top of the movement. You want to make sure that you have tension at the bottom, which is pretty much unavoidable. You also want to make sure that you have tension at the top. So what I mean is, you don't want to do a pull here and then end up with your lines all slack. You want to make sure that even your top position, you're still getting that squeeze and your muscles are still doing something. So if you want to adjust these, every single step you take forward is going to be a little bit more challenging. Now you're going to get to a point where if you go too far forward, things might start to get a little slippery. So you want to make sure that you're wearing grippy shoes. You also want to make sure you have a grippy surface. This one's quite good because I have a place to put my feet here. And then if I want to get really close, I can go ahead and put my feet right here and I can do my rows like this. Okay, so while there are a lot of advantages to suspension trainers in that you can use them for mobility work, you can use them for conditioning, they can give you all these novel ways to strengthen your muscles, they do have a few downsides. And one of them is that it's very hard to work on progressive overload, especially with the rows on these, because the way that you adjust your challenge, like we said, is by moving your feet and changing the leverage on your rows. So it can be really hard to be precise. Now, one thing you could do, you could get a bit of masking tape and you could move the tape up, and you can just make sure that you put your heels or your toes on the masking tape and then make it a little bit more challenging as you go. Now, the problem with that is once you get past a certain point, you're going to be slipping around unless you have a really grippy floor or unless you have some way to stabilize yourself. So if you have a couple hard points that you can use, you have a bit of control over your progression, but you're sort of going to be limited by that. In another video, we'll go ahead and show you how to set these up with a tree or some other outside point. If you decide to use your suspension trainer to get your rows in, it's pretty easy. If you're going to be outside, you don't need to worry about door anchors. All you need to do is find a nice tree. So I've got this tree right here. Because this is so adjustable, it doesn't really matter how high or low it is. You'll be able to find an option that'll work for you. So I like the look of this branch right here. Just gonna go ahead and get it. I'm gonna throw it over the top. Didn't quite get it, so I'm gonna pull it through. There we go. Now I've got this loop right here. And once again, if I loop this through, I'm gonna have a nice solid thing. Just for the purpose of this video, I threw it out here. Generally, for safety purposes, you always want to have it be closer to the tree. And in a perfect world, I might pick a slightly larger branch. There's lots of larger branches around, but they're not as nice for filming. So I'm just gonna use this one. So I wanna go ahead and check the height here. These are a bit low. We can adjust back and forth here so you can see I can take away quite a lot of slack. That's fine. Generally, for the handles, if they're somewhere around your hip height or knee height, you'll be able to find something that works. After that, you just pick an angle that works for you and you start rowing like so. As we mentioned elsewhere, if you do two-handed rowing, you're gonna have to go quite deep, especially once you get stronger, because in order to keep that progressive challenge with two hands at a time, you're not gonna get much challenge if you're standing upright. However, if you do decide to go with the single arm variation, then you don't have to go nearly as deep to find that challenge. So for this one, I come down here and I just pull myself up. So that's the challenge I can do if it's one-handed. However, if it's two-handed, I'd get my feet much, much closer. Like that. So just take that into consideration. And as always, if you're gonna be doing this outside, just be mindful of whether or not it's muddy. If you use the same spot for a long time, eventually the grass and everything will wear away, so it might get a little bit muddier. So always test the surface before you go ahead and try to go really deep on these rows just to be safe. Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and set up the suspension trainer. Keep in mind, every single model is gonna be different. So there's gonna be peculiarities to each one, but they're all gonna have the same basic idea. They're gonna have a way to anchor around a branch or something like that. They're gonna have a way to anchor into a door, and then they're gonna have a way to adjust, usually with the cam buckle. So this one's quite simple. I like this one because it doesn't have too many finicky bits. So we're gonna go ahead and loop this up here, and then I'm just gonna loop it through itself. So loop it in such a way so by pulling tight, there's no way it can become undone, just a classic loop through. And then from here, we've got an additional point. This is how we would attach it to a door, but in this case, because we're using a tree today, I'm gonna loop this through. And this is a bit tight, but there you go. You just kind of pull it through like there. So we've got that. But then now the tricky thing right here is what to do with this length. So I can make it longer. I can't make it shorter. So then the tricky bit here is how do you make it shorter? And you can loop it over the top. If you do this by looping over a few times, or I guess just doing a few repetitions of wrapping it, I should say, you want to make sure that when you pull on it, it's getting tighter and not looser. You don't want it to spin around itself. The friction is really important here. So for example, we tried this earlier on a steel bar, and a steel bar isn't going to have enough friction for this to work. However, if you have a nice tree branch, especially if it's pretty wide, that should work okay. So for this one, I'm going to try looping it in this direction first, and I'll go ahead and check it. Bring it over. That's good. And you'll just see that every single time I loop it over, it gets a little bit higher and there's a little bit more friction. So every single time I wrap, it's actually becoming just a little bit more secure. I'm gonna do one more. And obviously the number of wraps is gonna depend on how wide the branch is. So this one, I'm eyeballing it. This is probably gonna be a good height for this version. Okay, so we've just gone ahead and wrapped the suspension trainer above. Jill's gonna give it a good tug. It's not particularly a beautiful wrapping job, but the friction is really good. It's not gonna go anywhere. Jill's gonna go ahead and test the height just to make sure it feels good for her. So she's got a nice top position, check her bottom position. Good, she's got that bum wiggle at the bottom. So everything else is gonna be the same. You might find that if you're someone who tends to get elbow or shoulder pain, that pulling with the suspension trainer might be a little bit easier on your joints. If you're pulling with a straight bar, it's gonna force a very specific variation, a very specific range of motion. However, if you're doing it on the suspension trainer, both of your hands are gonna be free, which is gonna give you a little bit more freedom to find a movement pattern that works well for you. Everything else is the same, stretch at the bottom, big squeeze at the top, ensuring you don't use your feet too much, but using your feet enough to help you complete your reps.